The Underground Railroad was a metaphor first used by anti-slavery advocates in the 1840s to describe the increasingly organized and aggressive efforts to help slaves escape from bondage. The fight over fugitive slaves then became one of the primary causes of the Civil War. It's estimated that about 100,000 slaves escaped from slavery between 1810 and 1850. Of these, approximately 30,000 escaped into Canada through the Underground Railroad. Many stayed in northern cities and free states with large free black populations as well. Others escaped to Mexico, Florida, or the Caribbean islands. Most known routes of the Underground Railroad were in northern free states, where both free and runaway blacks, whites, and Native Americans gave their support financially and physically to the slaves. Few others, like Harriet Tubman, ventured into the southern slave states to help runaway slaves. Here there were fewer known networks. One of the areas through which runaway slaves traveled was Pennsylvania. For them, their goal was to get to the city of Philadelphia. Reaching Pennsylvania was a goal for two reasons. First, it was a border state to the slave states of Virginia and Maryland, and second, it had the largest free black population of any other free state, about 56,000. Once in Philadelphia, many runaway slaves would encounter William Still, who organized the Underground Railroad in the city, or one of his many operatives. Still worked for the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society, as well as the Philadelphia Vigilance Committee. Not all runaway slaves traveled to Philadelphia from the South. This story is about those that made their way by crossing into central Pennsylvania from Maryland, and receiving help in the south-central counties of Adams, York, Chester, and Lancaster. Lancaster County will become a popular location for runaway slaves. It was located on the Susquehanna River and had a large free black population. It would become a hotbed of legal activity and illegal activity, as well as violence. In the town of Lancaster, Thaddeus Stevens, a congressman of the state, worked legally to get change as an abolitionist. He also was an operative of the Underground Railroad and housed runaways in his home. Stevens was helped by his personal attendant, a black woman named Lydia Hamilton Smith. The home of James Buchanan was also located in Lancaster. He became the President of the United States during the time of the sectional conflict. Buchanan worked during his presidency to maintain the Union through continued compromise on the issue of slavery. Lancaster County also figured in illegal activity. The location of the city of Columbia on the Susquehanna River made it a very convenient location for travel for runaway slaves. Some came up the river, and others came from western Pennsylvania. Runaway slaves coming to Columbia would be forwarded to one of two ferry operators, freed slave Robert Loney or Quaker William Wright. Many of these would then be moved onward to Daniel Gibbons. Gibbons would then forward the baggage onward from there. It is said he helped over 1,000 slaves escape. Well-known free black citizens and railroad partners in Columbia, Stephen Smith and William Whipper, would help runaway slaves in Lancaster County by transporting them to Philadelphia in their false-end boxcars. Another operative who helped runaway slaves in central Pennsylvania was one William Goodrich, a former slave who became a very prosperous business owner in York County. He often transported slaves on open railroad cars that he owned, north to New York. He also transported them east to Columbia and Lancaster County. On a small farm located outside the town of Christiana, violence came to Lancaster County. Known as the Christiana Riot, it was an event that had direct connections to the Federal Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. On September 11, 1851, a Maryland slave owner came to Christiana to reclaim his property. His slaves were hiding at the home of a former slave, but current free black, William Parker. Fighting ensued, and after the dust settled, the Maryland slave owner, Edward Gorsuch, was killed, his son wounded, and the federal marshal and his deputies run off. Eventually, 38 persons were arrested and held in the attic of the Zerker Hotel, where they were questioned before being moved to Philadelphia for trial. All of them were acquitted of treason charges or released. The Zerker Hotel also held the dead Edward Gorsuch immediately after the riot. Outside the building is a monument to the participants of the Christiana riot, including a section memorializing Gorsuch for upholding the law, as well as one for William Parker for fighting for the freedom of his people. In 1861, after the election of Abraham Lincoln as president, the United States fought a civil war. But in January 1863, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation went into effect, setting the basis for the freedom of slaves in the United States, thus concluding the necessity of the Underground Railroad.